Hello, and welcome to week 47 of our 2 year Bible study. This week, we take a look at the book of Song of Songs as well as the beginning of the book of Proverbs. The Song of Songs clearly is a love song. It's one of the wisdom books within Scripture. And as we've said before, each of the books of the wisdom books of Scripture offset each other. And so in the book of Proverbs, we have living a wise life. In the book of Job, we have a offset to that to say just because you live a wise life doesn't mean that you're going to avoid suffering and difficulty. But then we have that offset by the Song of Songs, which indicates that even in the most difficult of lives, we have joy of joy being loved, certainly within family context as well as in Song of Songs, a marriage relationship. And then in Ecclesiastes, we have the reminder that we can't just pursue these good things because the good things in and of themselves are not the blessings, that God is the blessing and we need to pursue him. Well, how do we pursue him? Well, we pursue him by pursuing wisdom. And now we're right back to Proverbs again. And so we kind of have this circle that keeps going on between these four books. Well, the Song of Songs, there are two different structures that most theologians approach this book with. The one is that the most of the book is about the marriage relationship. This approach would see the lovers yearning for each other in chapter 1 through 3, verse 5. That the wedding occurs in 3, verse 6 through 5, verse 1. That there are temporary problems in 5, verse 2 through 6, verse 3. That there is delight in reconciliation in 6, verse 4 through 8, verse 4, and then a final affirmation of love in 8, verse 5 through 14. Another approach is that the entire book is really looking forward to marriage, so a marriage anticipation. And so that structure would look at it as the lovers yearning for each other in 1 verse 1 through 2 verse 17, the dream of the bride as she dreams of her groom in 3 verse 1 through 6 verse 3. The lovers yearn for each other in 6 verse 4 through 8 verse 4. And then the lovers join in marriage in 8 verse 5 through 14. I tend to come down on the second one as opposed to the first one, but I think that there is openness to approach it either way. But clearly, the book is declaring the beauty and the blessing of the marriage relationship. There are lots of sexual euphemisms throughout the book, indicating that as we know from Adam and Eve, that sex was created by God as a joyful blessing within a a biblical marriage. And so this book really takes a look at the joy and the blessing of the marriage relationship, both its anticipation as well as its fulfillment. So in the Song of Songs, chapter 1, we have the bride is concerned about her beauty as they meet at a banquet. So she's very concerned about how the groom is going to see her. And the groom, by the way, is pretty broadly recognized as Solomon. We're not quite sure who the bride is, although I do think that there is strong support that this is a Jewish woman, as opposed to all the, we know that Solomon had, 700 wives and 300 concubines. Most of those 1,000 women are probably some type of political deals that were made with other city states and nations. So, for instance, we know he married Pharaoh's daughter, probably not out of love, but more out of a treaty. If Pharaoh's daughter is in Solomon's palace, not very likely that Pharaoh is going to attack Solomon. And if Solomon has Pharaoh's daughter sitting right next to him, not very likely he's going to attack Pharaoh. So the marriages of daughters amongst kings was a common way of kind of sealing a treaty. And so my suspicion is that much of those 1,000 women are just women of treaty, as it were, or political seals. This woman in Song of Songs, it does not seem to be that at all. And there are indications throughout the book that she is probably Jewish. So this is not a foreign wife who would have led Solomon away, as we're going to see when we get a little further along in his lifetime, but rather one that is embodying what a faithful biblical marriage is. And so, getting back to chapter one, the Song of Songs, the bride is concerned about about her beauty as the groom and her meet at a banquet. In Song of Songs, chapter two, they spend time together, falling in love. And in Song of Songs, chapter three, he comes to marry her. Um, then, as we move along in chapter four, the groom describes his bride. And I think in many ways, this almost sounds vow like to me. So, this could be some of the words of the vow that Solomon used in his wedding. In chapter five, he visits her, but then leaves, and the bride describes her longing for her groom. Um, and in chapter six, the search for the groom who longs for his bride. And then in chapter seven, there's a continued remembrance as they come back together. And then in chapter eight, we have either the consummation of the marriage or a reconsummation of the marriage. Um, I think that it hinges much on how we interpret verse 5 of chapter 8. So verse 5 says, under the apple tree I roused you, and there your mother conceived you. There she who was in labor gave you birth. There's this idea of the arousal of love at this point, and throughout there has been this, even in verse 4, it says, Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. And so I think there's a very good case to be made that the second part of verse 5 of chapter 8 is the consummation of the marriage, where love is finally awakened through the sexual relationship. And then in verses 8 through 10, we have a remembrance of how it all, or 8 through 12, sorry, we have a remembrance of kind of how it all started. The bride's brothers had kept her pure. She met Solomon in the vineyard that her brothers leased out, but her body is hers to keep and give at her will. No one, Solomon or the caretakers, are getting it from her unless she willingly gives it. Um, and perhaps there's also some allusion here to Solomon's other gardens, his other wives who have caretakers, so eunuchs. But again, she is distinguishing herself from these. So overall, we have just a really beautiful book here. Um, there is a really outstanding song by Michael Card called Arise, My Love. I'll try to put the link for that in the description of the video so that you can listen to that. But it's intended to be a beautiful song about love, about the consummation of love and a sexual relationship within the bounds of a biblical marriage. So, not the book that we would expect sometimes to be in the Bible, but this is part of who God created us to be. And so it's appropriate for him to give us guidelines and parameters of what a healthy sexual relationship within a biblical marriage looks like. Next, we turn to the book of Proverbs. And as I mentioned just briefly ago, the book of Proverbs is really a book designed to help us understand how to live well. The book is certainly not intended to be rules, but rather to be guidelines. Common thing I say in my college classes is all of life is a bell curve, right? The Proverbs fall within that upper section of the bell curve, right? It's not looking at outliers. Job is an outlier. Song of Songs is an outlier. Ecclesiastes is an outlier. But Proverbs is saying if you normally live this way, there are going to be normal consequences, and here are the normal consequences. And all of that in light of not just worldly wisdom, but wisdom that comes from God for those who fear him. The book is written to my son. Most of the book is written by Solomon. And Solomon's son, probably Rehoboam, is a young man with the world, and all the temptations are before him. And so Solomon sets before him two women who are calling out to Solomon's son. And the women are wisdom and folly. And for the first 9 chapters, the two women and the paths that they travel are described. And then in chapters 10 through 30 are insights on how life is changed by either the woman of wisdom or the woman of folly. And then in chapter 31 is the embodiment of wisdom in the godly wife. Sorry. So if we want to see what the woman of wisdom looks like embodied, we look at a godly wife who's described in chapter 31. There is no parallel to chapter 31 because the woman of folly has no commitment. The woman of folly has no faithfulness to her. All the characteristics that the godly wife is described in chapter 31, there are no parallels to that. And so there's no parallel to the godly wife because the woman of folly will always bring destruction. And so Solomon is setting out for his son these proverbs so that he can live a life as first and foremost under the fear of God, but then also enjoy the godly wife who I think is also kind of connected to the Song of Songs that we just talked about. It sounds as though the woman in the Song of Songs is acting much like the godly wife that we see in the book of Proverbs. So in Proverbs 1, it opens up talking about how um, this book is in many ways written to everyone. I mean, it's written to his son specifically, but it's beneficial to all. And then Solomon sets out his one presupposition throughout the entire book, and that's in verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So the fear of the Lord is needed in order to gain wisdom. And this is the presupposition of all other statements throughout the entire book. So in verses 8 through 19, he encourages his son to be careful who you keep company with, as they will influence you. And then in verses 20 through 33, he says, wisdom does not hide herself, but makes herself available to all who accept the presupposition that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And so if we're to have wisdom or knowledge, we need to be able to pursue wisdom under the fear of the Lord. In Proverbs chapter 2, this chapter talks about how wisdom will bring God's blessing and protection, and that with wisdom you will be able to see the dangers around you. Proverbs chapter 3, we move into some wise sayings talking about the impact that wisdom has. Wisdom orbits around the Lord, and notice how often God is mentioned in connection to wisdom. And this is because wisdom comes from God. So wisdom not only orbits around the Lord, but wisdom has its origination in God's character himself. In Proverbs chapter 4, we see the admonition by Solomon to his son to get wisdom at any cost and to pursue it single-mindedly. Now, again, this is not just pursuing worldly wisdom, but godly wisdom. Well, pursuing godly wisdom requires the fear of the Lord. So if you're going to get wisdom at any cost and pursue it single-mindedly, you are going to pursue God single-mindedly and at any cost. And so it almost is like the two become synonymous with each other, at least at this point in the book, if not earlier. In Proverbs chapter 5, there is a warning against pursuing adultery and making sure that you keep your eyes on your own spouse. And then in Proverbs chapter 6, there is a discussion about the pursuit of wisdom and faithfulness and how it's hard work. It's not just something, it's not going to just be matrixed into our mind or downloaded into our mind. It's hard work to pursue wisdom and faithfulness. And so Solomon tells his son not to be lazy about that.